I could not do, even if I was prepared to try and cover everything in terms of conflict in the Pacific. What I can do, however, in an hour, is attempt to give you some value added. By value added, I mean ways of looking at the conflict in the Pacific in a more sophisticated, critical, and analytical way. Those three terms are the terms that distinguish Band 6 responses in the HSC from Band 4 responses that are primarily descriptive and narrative. Forget and drop everything you think you know about the war in the Pacific that you might have learned in middle school. A lot of it is either A, too simple, or B, wrong. Next, in terms of Australia's part in the conflict in the Pacific, Australia's sense of itself and national identity is bound up heavily in it, to the extent that at one stage, Paul Keating wanted the Kokoda campaign in New Guinea to be celebrated as part of the making of Australia and Australia's identity, rather than what he regarded as the remote and distant Gallipoli. So there are agendas here. Standard health and safety warning. Some of you people have had to put up with me in other lectures today for that. I apologise. But in case you weren't here for those, everybody needs a health and safety warning. Trust no one, especially me. Reason. I need you to make up your own mind. If I tell you stuff that you have read in other textbooks, if I tell you stuff that confirms what your teacher has told you, fine. If I offer you something different, basically think about, is what I am saying sensible? Is it supported? Is it sustained by evidence? Or am I just a crazy little ratbag? Sometimes I am just a crazy, eccentric little ratbag. Sometimes I'm particularly insightful. You've got to find which one of those I happen to be at any time. A reason why you might trust me. I occasionally get stuff sent to me by the Australian War Memorial to edit and review in relation to the conflict in the Pacific. Second, I have done research on aspects of the potential threat or otherwise of Japan to Australia in the Pacific War. Third, I wrote your syllabus. Some people are happy to hear that. Gosh. Some people, basically, if you don't like it, I will automatically go with plausible denial and blame some other person on this meeting and pretend I had nothing to do with it. I wrote this. I wrote most of it. And therefore, I've got a fairly good idea of what's expected. Now, note the two illustrations that it starts with, because this is what I want to do in terms of value added. I am not going to give you a timeline of conflict in the Pacific, all right? I am not going to tell you the story of conflict in the Pacific. Basically, you can find that. Just Google War in the Pacific, Wikipedia, and you'll get the story. But you'll get different versions of it. You go to any Boys and Girls Own Guide textbook, you will get it. If you go to the CD disc that's part of my textbook, you'll get it. But the point is, that will not get you Band 6. What I'm focusing on is the historiography, interpretations of conflict in the Pacific, and trying to sort out why things happened as they did. All right? Now, those interpretations of conflict in the Pacific, quite frankly, have changed over time, as most history does. I am focusing on outcome, H3.4. Explain and evaluate differing perspectives and interpretations of the past. I can make an argument to you that the Western powers did in fact victimise Japan. That is not a popular idea. Now, if I say things that run contrary to the accepted wisdom about Australia and its part of the Pacific, let me say this. I am on safe ground. My father fought in that war. My uncle fought in that war. My uncle was a POW of the Japanese at Changi. With the fall of Singapore, he was part of the 8th Division. My uncle finished the war as a POW as part of J-Force in Japan. My uncle came back off the boat in 1945, and essentially my uncle was slightly shorter than me, much more heavily built than me, but he came back weighing about 30 kilos. If the atomic bomb had not been used, my uncle would have been dead. Right? I will address aspects of that going forward. So if I sort of say things that seem a little bit disrespectful and a little bit heretical, I'm not, because my family was involved in the process. But starting here, one, I start with that because this is the perspective of a Japanese historian, and it is a perspective that even makes the current Japanese government a little bit uncomfortable, because it explores Japan's culpability, guilt, responsibility for aspects of the war. And I need you to think about this going forward. How much of the history you are taught at school is to, in fact, to teach you to be historians, and how much of it is actually to make you proud to be Australian? John Winston Howard believed that that was the purpose of history. I disagree. The purpose of history is to teach you to think and interrogate. But that history is worth using, and it's not a traditional or typical version. Peter Stanley I regard as a friend. Peter Stanley was former chief historian of the Australian War Memorial. Peter Stanley is a Pom. Peter Stanley actually claimed that on the evidence the Japanese never intended to invade Australia. And he's right. When he first wrote that, there were a whole lot of people who were deeply offended and saying, well, you'd say that because you're an Englishman and you don't really understand. And I remember how they were digging trenches in Sydney because we knew that the little slanty-eyed ones were coming, right? I mean, no offence, I'm simply using the language of the time, okay? And in actual fact, well, the Japanese printed invasion money. Yes, they did. Invasion money was to be used throughout the whole prosperity sphere, not just in Australia, okay? There is no evidence that Japan ever actually intended to occupy Australia. A lot of that comes from the propaganda that was developed by the Curtin administration, basically to galvanise the Australian home front. All those posters that is coming south is not in actual fact what was happening. It was rather to make us alert to the risk of Japan at war. And that's tied in. Now, this war was different for us because it was the first time that Australia came under direct attack. Darwin was bombed, Broome was bombed, Sydney Harbour was attacked, and the one by personal bias, Newcastle was attacked, and everybody forgets that except. Okay? Newcastle was shelled. And for Australians, that was positively traumatic. We are still relatively comfortable in the idea that we are isolated from this. So let's start to have a look at it. The syllabus, as I said, for your core study, please note, I'm a primary source, therefore I'm reliable. I think that's beautifully written. But what I'm going to do is touch on a number of these issues. The growth of Pacific tensions. Where did they come from? They came from the fact primarily that Japan suffered severely from the global economic recession of the 1920s and suffered severely from the Great Depression from 1929. Japan was an island nation and it had a growing population, but it was short of resources. Japan, therefore, took the option of doing exactly what they had seen the European powers do. Please remember that the European powers used military force to open Japan to Western contact and trade in 1853 with gunboats. The European powers, when it suited their purposes, carved up China for China's resources. When Japan started to do exactly the same thing, the Japanese were somewhat puzzled when the Europeans said, yeah, well, it's okay when we do that, but you're not allowed to. And the Japanese resented that fact. In other words, the Europeans had carved up as much as they wanted, but when the Japanese attempted to do the same thing, the European powers took a very different stance. Please note, put your hand up if in the last month you have ridden in a Japanese car. Hands. Look around the room. Put your hand up if you have ever owned a Japanese watch. Hands. Look around the room. Hands of Japanese watch.
China.
Seiko. Anybody ridden in a Mitsubishi lately? They made the Zero aeroplane in World War II. In other words, Japan's militarist tradition, however, influenced Japan to go down the path of conquest, rather than what Japan has done since, where they have used Toyota, where they have used Seiko watches, where they have used all the related technology to get the economic empire in Asia and the Pacific that they tried to take with armed force from 1941. Had they gone down that other path, things would have been different. Why didn't they go down that path? They didn't go down that path because Japan had a militaristic tradition. In other words, their culture up to that point where they had contact with the West was dominated by the idea, if you like, a code of Bushido, if you like, that members of the military were an elite class, and it was an authoritarian approach. When I stand back and I look, and please remember that, I am extremely left-wing bullshit, okay? I'm probably more left-wing than most people you are likely to be, okay? I'm positively radical, right? When I look at groups of young people all arrayed in uniforms, I see Japan in the 1930s. Basically because they wanted everybody dressed the same and they were told that everybody had to obey the hierarchical system. And the idea of, if you are all in uniform, it represses your individuality, and you know that's not a good thing. You need to be part of the team. All right. So therefore, their idea of education was basically obedience to those above them, and above all, obedience to the emperor. And it was that hierarchical structure. Now, it worked well for them up to a point. Next, Japanese society was profoundly racist. What you need to understand about the Pacific War is it was a race war. We had racist attitudes towards the Japanese, and the Japanese had racist attitudes towards everybody else. The Chinese had racist attitudes towards the Japanese. I have read Chinese texts from the early 20th century where they referred to their Japanese cousins as, and I quote, little yellow monkeys, close quote. Okay? There were Australian soldiers who were members of the 8th Division who were told they didn't have to worry about Japanese aircraft because we all knew that they had bad vision and they couldn't fly at night. I'm not kidding. This came out of 8th Division, pardon the expression, military intelligence, which is quite frankly a contradiction in terms. The British assumed that all they had to do in order to deter the Japanese from moving south was to send the Repulse and the Prince of Wales, Z-Force, out to the Pacific in these two great European battleships would scare the bejesus out of the Japanese, right? So the Repulse and the Prince of Wales sailed out off the Burma coast without air cover. And the Japanese said, "Oh, thank you," and sank them both. You're not meant to do that. This is the world. So the fact of the matter is, not only that, here's how bad it is. This is the level of lack of understanding in the Australian and the British Army. Everything is done on a 3 count. You salute. 1, 2, 3. 1. Okay? Those of you who have never been in a cadet corps won't know this. The standard stride for the Australian Army when marching was meant to be 30 inches. Okay? And everyone was meant to march this way. Now, what did British military intelligence do in Malaya? They calculated the rate of march at which the Japanese would move south down the Malayan Peninsula. And it was calculated that if you counted, even allowing for 25-inch steps, because the Japanese were meant to be smaller. Right. And they actually would have briefings of soldiers. I know from my uncle who was part of the 8th Division. So what happens? 1, British forces and the Australian 8th Division, who on one occasion staged a successful ambush, but pretty much pulled back to Singapore, kept getting outflanked by the Japanese because they kept arriving before we were ready. Little bastards! How dare they arrive early? We'd calculated how fast they would march south with 30-inch strides. Okay, even walking briskly. But what did they do? They got bicycles. I mean, if you're gonna do a war, do it fair. They jumped on bicycles. Not only that, when the bicycles got punctured, they would ride on the rim of the bicycle. And at least one documented occasion, and it's in the Australian War Museum, one unit actually retreated because they heard Japanese tanks coming. They weren't Japanese tanks. They were the sounds of the bicycles on the road. And it sounded, oh, we're here, they got tanks. In other words, so much of this war was about race. On the Japanese side, race worked this way. When they attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, they knew what they were getting into. Isoroku Yamamoto knew full well that in actual fact, what was happening was Japan could not defeat the United States. What they intended to do was simply take out the 7th Fleet and then establish a defensive perimeter. And they were firmly convinced that the Americans were so full of hot dogs and malted milkshakes and that they were decadent that they essentially would give up. So in other words, there was an idea of race on the Japanese side. Okay, value added, growth of Pacific conflict. Basically, he dates the Pacific War to 1931. He dates it from 1931. And therefore, it could be seen as a 15-year war. Okay? If you're talking about a Pacific War, China has a very different perspective. Now, in its own time, China would be perfectly willing to take advantage of Japan if they thought they could. And the whole concept of the kamikaze, the divine wind, dates from a period back in the Mongol era where the Chinese tried to invade Japan, but their fleet was destroyed by a typhoon. There's even controversy about the first kamikazes. There is a dispute between Peter Stanley and the Australian War Memorial, he's now at the Australian National Museum, and the Americans. The Americans will tell you that the first kamikaze attacks were against them. They weren't, they were against us. But what their argument is, oh no, the kamikazes that ran into our ships deliberately meant to run into our ships. The kamikazes that ran into Australian ships only did it by accident. So in actual fact, there is controversy throughout the process. Basically, that the militaristic and expansionist policies of the Japanese can be traced back to the 19th century. In other words, this was not something that just came out of the 20s. When countries act in certain ways, you can often trace back the roots of that behaviour and that thinking. he pointed out that as far back as 1823, there was a book written that basically set out principles that were typical and reflected the characteristics of Japan's greater Southeast Asia co-prosperity sphere. Japan modelled itself on Great Britain. The Japanese Navy, even some of its insignia, were modelled on the Royal Navy. The characteristic of Japan was always its capacity to borrow new technology. For the record, their army was modelled on the German army, but their navy was modelled on the Royal Navy. Hence the fate of the repulsive principles is quite ironic. In other words, Japanese learned how to do that sort of stuff from the British. Japanese success in the First Sino-Japanese War, basically that, and their war, and here's the thing, all those people out there who look at you and go, why do you do history? And I'm far more interested in what happens tomorrow than what happened in the past. They're the great unwashed. They've got no bloody idea. In other words, the fact of the matter is, if historians had been consulted, we should have anticipated the Japanese attack on December 7, 1941. Why? In the Code of Bushido, the whole principle, and if you read stuff about Japanese culture, like Ruth Benedict's The Sword and the Chrysanthemum, the whole swordcraft associated with the samurai sword, the big one, the katana, as opposed to European swordcraft. In European fencing, you've got thrust and parry. In other words, you've got, I stab the other guy, I stop the other guy stabbing me. In Japanese swordcraft, it's all who draws first. And it's all about one single stroke. And the guy who moves first more often than not wins. In other words, in the Japanese military thinking, if you take the initiative and strike first and strike hard, you will have an advantage. They did that to the Russians in 1904, 1905. And how did they do it? A surprise attack on a Russian naval base at Port Arthur, destroying the Russian Pacific Fleet. I couldn't have thought that they would do that at Pearl Harbor. Have you read a history book? No. Right? So the fact of the matter is, it should have been anticipated. Not only that, the British had staged a similar torpedo raid against the Italian Navy in the Mediterranean, and the Japanese took notes. And they did exactly the same thing to the US 7th Fleet. Why was the US 7th Fleet in Pearl Harbor in the first place? One, the base of the US 7th Fleet was San Diego, California, the other side of the Pacific. What was the 7th Fleet doing in the middle of the Pacific in a base that was inadequate to support it? All we have to do is show our presence in the area, and that will frighten the little Asian ones. That was it. The US 7th Fleet was put in the middle of the Pacific to deter Japanese aggression, and the Japanese response was awesome. We're now within reach. Thanks. In other words, the American strategy of putting its fleet in Pearl Harbor was based on race thinking that the Japanese were inferior and they would be frightened by us. The Japanese took a very, very different response to that. Pointed out that Japan's attitude to Japan and China were identical to Western imperialist attitude. Oh no, we don't do bad things. We're us. We're lovely. We do good things. No, basically, if you honestly look at it. Now, I'm not for one moment, and my uncle had an experience of some Japanese behaviour in those concentration camps that is unimaginably sadistic and cruel. I'm not defending that for 1 minute. But what I am saying is, if you step back for a minute and you try and look at it in part from the Japanese point of view, there could be a sense of injustice. That the Western powers had one standard for themselves and another one for the Asians. Okay. There was a general consensus in Japan that China and its resources and Korea and its resources had to be exploited. And there was a reasonable assumption on Japanese part that this was the way major powers behaved. Why? Because their experience was dominated by the European imperialist powers doing exactly that. Essentially, it might have been possible through trade and investment, but that was made difficult given the structure of Japanese culture, where trade and business were not valued. Okay? Government service and the military, the samurai caste and that role was far more significant. Primarily, there is evidence that there were two conflicting views within the Japanese military, whether they would launch a military campaign and drive north and move into northern China and maybe threaten Russia and the Russian border, or drive south. There was a major pre-1941 engagement between elements of the Japanese Imperial Army and General Zhukov, the Russian Red Army commander, and the Japanese got spanked. And the result was they looked for the option of driving south, and the Navy got more of a say in how it was done. And the reason they drove south was there was oil. Now, from the moment that Roosevelt imposes an oil embargo on Japan, he puts them between the rock and the hard place. They either have to back down to European threats or do something. And they decided to do something. And what they decided to do was remove the threat of the US 7th Fleet temporarily and then drive south for the tin and rubber raw materials that were available in Malaya, and then drive further south into the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia, for oil. And once they had that, the only reason they would come at Australia would be the prospect that Australia might be an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Did they plan to drive as far south as Brisbane? Answer, no. For the record, and this is one that people forget, and you can always win a trivia quiz with this, the Japanese did invade Australia. No, not in the film Australia with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Jackman, where they happen, because that's all bollocks. But in actual fact, we have evidence now that the Japanese landed a reconnaissance force in the Kimberleys in the northwest of Western Australia. And they didn't stay, and we didn't know about it, so it didn't frighten us. We only found out about it later. It's a bit like the New Zealanders who don't know that they were invaded by the Germans in World War II. A German submarine actually came ashore off the North Island of New Zealand and stole 2 sheep. And then I was in New Zealand, and basically we were calculating how much Germany owed New Zealand in compensation for the price of lamb, multiplied by how many years. So in other words, but it actually happened, but it was a reconnaissance. And essentially, if the Japanese had come through the Kokoda Track and managed to take Port Moresby, maybe they would have taken Darwin, but that would have been it. They weren't after the rest of the country. They couldn't sustain control of the rest of the country. Okay, military in the state. The Imperial Army, virtually unlimited freedom of action. This is why they didn't go down the Mitsubishi, Suzuki, right? Toyota path. They went the military path. The Army and the Navy each jealously guarded their autonomy. They weren't going to be messed with by politicians. There was a significant period of political assassination in Japan in the 1930s. The Prime Minister, General Tojo, basically, you've got this clash between army control, navy control, military control. All right. When the US imposes economic sanctions, you get a cycle of mutual provocation. If you keep threatening someone, that someone will either back down or react to those threats. That's exactly what happened. Pretty much everything the Americans did, the Japanese occupation of southern Indochina, what had happened in the European War is that France collapses and its colonies are basically open. The Japanese moved into Indochina with little or no resistance, and they have available there resources, food supplies from Indochina, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. The blockade continued, but the crunch was oil. Now that meant that if the oil embargo started, the Japanese knew that they had a limited window of action. And they took it. Okay. The Japanese basically regarded, right, the Southeast Asian co-prosperity scheme, and the propaganda for it was, this is a war for the liberation of Asia, and we are the leading Asian power, so we will lead our Asian brothers. The only problem with that is the Japanese were such family racist that they didn't have much time for Indians or Cambodians or Koreans, especially not much time for Koreans, and even less time for Chinese. The groups that were most victimised in any area of Malaya, of Singapore, of Hong Kong by the Japanese were in fact the ethnic Chinese. So in terms of civilians of war, it is a race war. They referred to the A, B, C, D encirclement, America, Britain, China, and the Dutch. And that campaign, that propaganda, that mode of thinking was there for the Japanese from the 1930s. And they believed that they were being denied their rightful place in Asia. Even the USA contributed to this. Okay? They believed that they had no option but to make war. Okay? Now, please bear this in mind. A great Australian historian, Geoffrey Blaney, wrote a book called On the Causes of War. In that book, Blaney argues that countries only go to war if they think they can win. Right? If that's the case, how come Germany goes to war in World War II? How come Japan goes to war in World War II? Because with the benefit of hindsight, they lost. At the time, both the Germans in the conflict in Europe and the Japanese in the conflict in the Pacific quite rationally went to war with a rational prospect that they would succeed. Japanese thinking, however, like our thinking, was dominated by race. They thought we were weak, morally weak, not militarily weak. They emphasised the fact that America was really rich. And this was the thing. And here's the parallel. You guys are not really old enough to remember it, but I can remember when the World Trade Center buildings came down. And my first thought was, when the stock market crashed, the people who sold off got it wrong. Because there is one characteristic of American society, and that's its resilience. And the Japanese didn't see that. They just saw the material comfort. What happened the morning after that surprise attack on the United States, when the World Trade Center buildings came down, was that members of all political parties of US Congress appeared on the steps of US Congress, and it's really nerdy, but they simply stood there and sang God Bless America. And the result was America started spending more money on defence, and the stock market went up, and then you got George Bush, and then you got a whole bunch of wars in the Middle East because the Americans were going to smash somebody. So the very fact that when the Japanese did this at Pearl Harbor, it galvanized American opinion in a way that couldn't have been done by any other act, and that was an underestimation. I have sat in the Roosevelt Library, the Franklin Roosevelt Library. I have held in my hand the text of his speech, that famous speech in Congress. And the original text of the speech that he was meant to deliver read, December 7th, 1941 is a date that will live in history. And in his own handwriting, FDR crossed out history and wrote in infamy. In other words, this was, and I'll use another one of FDR's words, a dastardly attack by the Empire of Japan. And that galvanized American public opinion in a more dramatic way than you can imagine. And it still lasts. If you go to Hawaii, go to Pearl Harbor, and if you go to the site of Pearl Harbor, you'll see two things. One, you'll see the Arizona Memorial. The Arizona was an outdated battleship that was sunk. Many of the crew are still entombed in the Arizona. It's a national war grave. At the other end of Battleship Row, along Fort Island and Pearl Harbor, is the American battleship Missouri. Missouri wasn't even commissioned in 1941 and was never at Pearl Harbor except when it was decommissioned. The popular American version of Pearl Harbor is, we just do this to represent the beginning and the end of the war. If you believe that, I've got some swampland I'd like to sell you in Queensland. The message of that is, you guys started it and did this. We dropped 2 A-bombs on you and made you sign a peace treaty on board this. And the moral of the story is, don't mess with us, otherwise we'll blow you to smithereens. Not only that, how bad was Pearl Harbor? Yes, they lost the Arizona. Arizona had a top speed of 21 knots. It was an outdated battleship. It couldn't, even if it hadn't been sunk, it couldn't have kept up with any of the American aircraft carriers, not even Lexington, not even Yorktown, not even Saratoga. So it would have been useless. It would have just been a big boat that sailed very, very slowly from one island to another island and was used as a floating artillery platform. So even if Arizona doesn't get sunk, but what about all the others? Guess what? American ingenuity, American industry means that with the exception of the Arizona, every other battleship, with the exception of the Oklahoma, gets back into action before World War II ends. The US fleet wasn't destroyed. It was temporarily put out of commission. And there were Japanese forces at the Battle of Leyte Gulf who were suddenly confronted with American battleships that they thought they'd sunk at Pearl Harbor on December 7th. The only country who could have made that possible was American industry. And the Japanese weren't going to win that war. Therefore, the Japanese went to war hoping for a short, sharp shock and then a negotiated settlement. Now that proved to be misguided. Okay, Japan's miscalculations. Their education system, this is where I was going on about everybody in school uniform. Right? I apologise, the uniforms are lovely. Besides, you don't have to worry about what you wear in the morning. See, I don't know, my wife picks all my clothes. I've got a white shirt today. Somebody once said, Dennett, why do you always wear blue? I said, I don't know. I'll have to go home and ask. And I went up and said, why do I always wear blue? And my wife said, 1, I think you look nice in blue. 2, you can't get it wrong. So that was the answer. Okay. A lack of academic freedom. You see, I can say baggy things. In Japanese institutions and in Japanese schools, that kind of thought wasn't encouraged. And in a scary way, it still exists. I actually teach on exchange Japanese university students, and I've done it at Macquarie. And they come in there very respectfully to write down all the words of wisdom I've got to give them. And I'm trying to poke them and make them think. And then very, very quietly they will get away from the others. Actually, did we do that? We actually do that to the Japanese, to the Chinese. Yes, there was a thing called the robot pancake. Oh, we never learned that at school. So in other words, the education system, lack of academic freedom, gave them a very narrow focus. So again, next time somebody tells you the Australian education system is not equipping our young people to compete with Asia. Duh. So much of the Asian system has got nothing to do with education and everything about training. So please give our schools a break. We're bloody lucky. All right. Race war. By the way, that come out very bad. That's the cover of the book. That is a chimpanzee scratching his ass. And it appeared in the book in 1907. And basically, John W. Dower, War Without Mercy, Race and Power in the Pacific War. Basically, that bulletin is about Australia getting its own fleet. And basically, the argument is we need a bigger one. Because our fleet will only be a flea bite to the Japanese. But look at the way the Japanese are depicted. And Australia has always had this fear of the yellow peril. And then, of course, when China went communist, it turned into a kind of orange peril because it was yellow and red. Okay. Elements of racism, both on their side and our side, produced miscalculations related to the Pearl Harbor attack. The American fleet should never have been exposed to the Japanese. But there's also an element of chance. The Japanese sank battleships. As it turned out, the battleship was not the decisive weapon of sea power in the Pacific. It was aircraft carriers. And they had done the reconnaissance and they planned to take out the US cavalry carriers that were under the command of Admiral William Halsey. But Halsey, just by chance, had them out on exercises and they were off resupplying Wake Island. If the Japanese destroy the US carriers, everything changes in the Pacific and maybe the war lasts a whole lot longer than it did. Here's the other thing. If the Japanese commander, Nagomo, in fact, comes back and launches a third raid and destroys American dry docks and American oil supplies, everything changes again. If that happens, the US fleet can't stay in Hawaii where they shouldn't have been in the first place. The US fleet actually has to go back to San Diego. And that makes everything different. But Nagomo didn't know where the US carriers were. Therefore, he was afraid that the US carriers may well stage a counter-strike against his attack force, and that would be the most dangerous moment. The most dangerous moment in area carrier operation was when you are bringing your aircraft in to be rearmed and refueled. That's how the Japanese got caught at Midway. So in a way, Nagomo was being extra cautious. But it proved to be a problem. Okay. Again, the Japanese mentality. Book is published, 1929. Why fear the United States? And the Japanese argue, we've got better battleships than them. Because the Japanese battleships were newer. And technologically, some of them were actually better. But again, here's the difference. It was a matter of, it is less than 12 months ago, I was walking around the decks of the North Carolina. The North Carolina was an American battleship that was commissioned and came into service in 1940. The Japanese blew up or sank all the old American battleships, but shortly after that, the world's most powerful battleship, the North Carolina, came into service. It was then followed by the Missouri, and this was the capacity of American industry. The Japanese plan, okay? Look at it. September 41. Although America's total defeat is judged utterly impossible, it is not inconceivable that a shift in American public opinion. The Japanese underestimate that sense of resolve in the American people and FDR's leadership. Might surrender before the war came back. Occupation, vital areas, ensure a superior strategic position. The plan was to seize and ring off a portion of Asia, a portion that would give Japan the means to sustain itself. The Gardo declared, basically, they overestimated themselves, underestimated the capacity, had a low opinion of the British, okay? Had an excessively high opinion of the Germans, and basically misunderstood. Okay. The Japanese were restless. They did. Okay, this is the thing that I have issues with. I respect other people's beliefs. I'm cool with that. Okay? What I am not cool with was when the Japanese lived by, the military were brought up with the code of Bushido, which means if you surrender, you are disgraced and you are worthless. And I've done research at Cowra. Cowra was the site of the Japanese POW camp, southwestern New South Wales. The Japanese in that camp felt so disgraced that they staged a major breakout. It was covered up by the Australian government. And the reason the Australian government covered it up was we were scared that the Japanese would hear that we had machine gunned so many of these Japanese POWs trying to break out, that they would mistreat our people, little knowing how much they were mistreating our people. Now let's again put this in perspective. My uncle told me one story about where, and he even said the guards were different. That again, they're not uniform. That some of them were more brutal and sadistic than others. But it was legitimate to them. Like the Japanese, when they landed in Singapore, they eventually took Singapore. They stormed into Alexandra Hospital. And a British officer came out and he was immediately bayoneted. The Japanese then went through the wards and bayoneted all the people in their beds. Now, that was because they were useless. They weren't warriors, they shouldn't be dead anyway. There were Japanese who deliberately committed harikiri, seppuku, okay, ritual suicide, because they felt that they had been disgraced. The Japanese government, even in the 1960s, would not support a memorial to both the guards who had been killed at the Cowra breakout or their own dead people. They didn't want to know. And it took until the 1980s before the Japanese government acknowledged that. So I don't mind what your attitude is, but I tend to resent it when you impose your attitude on somebody else. I've lost it. There, excellent. Okay. The cause of the war. Okay. The Japanese had early successes. Why? Because they were primed for it. 2, because they were underestimated. Well and truly by us. The Pearl Harbor attack, the Malayan Peninsula, General Sir John Percival, for God's sake. Okay, here's the irony. Percival is in command of Singapore. If Percival waits one more day, before ordering the capitulation, Yamashita has so extended his lines of supply, Yamashita was prepared to withdraw back up the Malayan Peninsula. History is never carved in stone. History is a whole chain of events at which at any moment the result could have been different. The big problem with the defence of Singapore was the assumption that nobody could come down the Malayan Peninsula, and therefore all the heavy armament was based out to sea. Australia depended for our security on that Royal Naval Base at Singapore, and we had this deep and profound faith in the Royal Navy to protect us. So we quite happily set off the 6th and the 7th Division to fight Britain's war in the Middle East against the Germans and the Italians. And were left relatively undefended. The turning point of the war, and there are two. One can be, for example, the campaign at Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. The other one is Midway Island. At Midway, the balance of aircraft carrier power and the balance of naval power in the Pacific shifts. Not just in terms of numbers of ships sunk, but shifts in the sense that Japanese trained fighter pilots, naval pilots, they sustain so many losses that they cannot retrain and sustain them. The reason for the kamikaze is not just that the Japanese is a fanatic. The reason for the kamikaze is the hardest thing, and I have a pilot's license, and I will tell you, it is very, very easy. I can teach anyone in this room how to get in a propeller-driven aircraft and take off and fly straight and level, and I can teach anyone in this room how to do that within 2 hours. Landing, however, is different. And learning how to land an aircraft takes a whole lot more time. Therefore, the kamikaze you could put in a fairly ordinary aircraft, teach someone to take off, fly straight and level, and then aim it at a big warship. Okay? Now here's the thing. The casualties from kamikazes, and it was a kind of psychological thing, the casualties from kamikazes, in fact, work against the Japanese. Because when you are a kamikaze, you don't come in zigging and zagging, you come in straight. And what happens with anti-aircraft fire, any anti-aircraft gunner leads their target. He's coming straight this way, so we just put up a whole lot of fire in front of where he's going to be shortly, and you blow him out of the sky. But when you miss, the impact is fairly dramatic. But it was a psychological kind of warfare. Vast differences between industrial production and capacity. Write it down. It's the reason we win. The supremacy of American air power, both conventional and naval air power, are decisive. Oh, sorry. You okay? All that's in the books. That's all quite straightforward. You know you've got 45 minutes to write this in the HSC. Take a photo. Okay. These things the Japanese were actually very good at, and we underestimated that. The Mitsubishi Zero was one of the best fighter aircraft in the Pacific Theatre. It could only be matched early in the war by the Supermarine Spitfires. But of course the Australian Air Force didn't have those. We had the Brewster Buffalo. And the Brewster Buffalo flew exactly the way you'd think a plane called the Brewster Buffalo flew. Here we come. Alright. Weaknesses. Basically, difference in economic productivity. The Japanese only American spirit was actually considered. Freedom of dynamism. Basically, there was, look, the Americans were quite remarkable. You had people, and I mean, to some extent we get saturated by this with American films, but the fact of the matter is, you get American national guardsmen from North Dakota fighting in a Pacific Island war and just displaying remarkable character and remarkable courage and remarkable resilience. And the Japanese just didn't think that Americans would behave that way. Again, it's a race war. And it's on both sides. Okay. Civilians at war. Again, Dara, it is a race war. Basically, you've got groups in Southeast Asia, okay? The AAA movement, Japan, leader of Asia, Japan, protector of Asia, Japan, light of Asia. Okay, yeah, it's Asia, 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 but it's also Japan. I've been to some schools in Sydney where they have histories, especially schools near the harbour, and there are pictures of trenches being dug, right, to protect our little people from Japanese raids. And trust me, it really freaked people in and around Sydney when the Japanese came into Sydney Harbour. And that, again, wasn't strategic. There was a big American cruiser, the Chicago, in Sydney Harbour. The Japanese sent in midget submarines, and it wasn't because the Chicago was such a threat. It was one cruiser. It was what they thought it would do to us. And on one level it did. My mother-in-law was evacuated by her family, right, from Drummoyne because of the Japanese to Patterson in the Hunter Valley, where she spent the rest of the war. And I said, why? That put you closer to the Japanese. She said, the point is that it did have a psychological impact. Not only that, Curtin used MacArthur as kind of a cardboard cutout to give confidence to the Australian people, even though MacArthur had MacArthur and not an army with him at the time. Okay. Racist perspective again, co-prosperity sphere. The idea of the Japanese, what they were Japanese or Japanese, the region. Okay, I want to skip through because I've got 2 minutes, I've got to go quick. I'll let you take photos at it later. I want to deal with these. Okay, the A-bomb. Okay, there is a major historical debate over the use of the atomic bomb. First of all, the traditional version goes like this. The A-bomb shortened the war. The A-bomb was necessary. The A-bomb was just another weapon. That without the A-bomb, the war would have carried on longer and there would have been more casualties on all sides. There is an argument that Truman was given a figure of 1 million Allied casualties if we endeavoured to invade Japan. However, an American historian by the name of Gar Alperovitz, you've got to be American with a name like Gar Alperovitz, in a book called Atomic Diplomacy, argued that the Americans could have had a negotiated settlement and that the use of the atomic bomb was more to do with the post-war period and putting the frighteners on the Russians. America is still the only country who has used atomic bombs as weapons in war. And that idea was to send a message that we are willing to do it. Reasons for the Japanese defeat, they've been covered in the lecture. This is American initiative, and this is also bloody well us. Okay? My dad once said to me, you know, Bruce, I'm the reason the Japanese didn't invade. And as a good historian would, I didn't take my dad at face value. I actually asked him a series of questions. I said, Dad, why do you say that? He said, the Imperial Japanese Army was in New Guinea, and I was patrolling 90 Mile Beach near Darwin. Okay, Dad, so you're telling me that you are the reason all of the Imperial Japanese Army was invaded. And I said, tell me about 90 Mile Beach. He said it was 90 miles long. Who was there? Only me. You're guarding 90 Mile horse. So Dad, you're telling me that you, with your Lee Enfield short magazine 303 and a horse, patrolling 90 Mile Beach, stopped me. Oh, well, I can see Laurie getting over there. And I said, Dad, I can't believe that. My father, as only my father could do, put it straight in the answer. What you need to do is interrogate causes. The War Crimes Tribunals. The War Crimes Tribunals for the Far East. Yamashita executed. Kojo executed. The Emperor got off. The Australian Chief Judge, Justice Webb, wanted the Emperor hanged along with everybody else. But basically what we wanted to do and what we succeeded in doing was making Japan a post-war ally. Okay, reread the content, look at the sources, remember Dennett's Law. In the HSC, the questions are always easy, it's only the answers that are hard.
Happy birthday. Just go.